Writing introductions and conclusions can be probably the hardest part of writing a paper. So the textbook does give some helpful strategies on, how to, or just some basic ideas on how to write your introductions and conclusions and what strategies you can use to do that. So make sure you reference the book when you go to revise your introductions and conclusions for the portfolio, because they are very, very important aspects of your writing. So make sure you spend some time with them. And I understand it can be really difficult and really frustrating, but if you work with each one individually and just give it some time, your revisions will be worth the effort, I promise. So let's begin with introductions. I'm just going to go really quickly over the basic information that the textbook brings up because it's really good information. So make sure that your introductions bring your reader into your subject. And to do that, you want to meet these objectives. You want to define the topic. You want to indicate your methodology. You want to provide any background information that's essential for your reader to understand the context of your argument or whatever it is you're writing about. You want to give a thesis or a working thesis, and then you want to engage or hook your reader. I disagree with what the textbook says. The textbook says that doing this can often be mistaken as an opportunity to be cute or silly or something like that. And I'm not saying that when you hook or engage your reader that you do that, but you can do it in an academic way. You don't have to be cute, but you can be creative. Creative is okay, even in composition. You want to have your reader want to read your paper. Think about me. Try to get me to want to read your paper because you engaged me, not because I have to in order to grade you. Okay, so I do disagree with the book on that. I disagree with them later. So, yeah, so long as you engage them or hook them, your readers, in an academic way, I strongly advise you to. Regarding length, your introductions and even your conclusions, length will be based on the length of your paper. So for this class, your longest paper, I believe, is 5 pages. So your paragraphs or your introduction and conclusion should be 1 paragraph. If you get into a longer work like a book, just go read a book and read the introduction. It's going to be 10, 15, 20 pages long, and it still counts as the introduction because it's meeting these objectives. Okay, so I just want you to know that an introduction is not always a paragraph. You will see this in longer articles. You may see a whole section of an article be an introduction and a whole section be a conclusion, and that's because the complexity of the thinking within that article is much higher, so they need more introduction and more conclusion in order to do their job as the writer for the reader. Make sure you provide a context for your issue. Why does what you have to say matter? Kind of relates to that so what question. In the textbook, make sure you focus on the introductions and the humanities, not so much the sciences. If you go into the sciences later, that's great, but they will teach you how to write the way they want you to write. So just stick with the information the textbook gives about the humanities and don't worry so much about the sciences. Okay, this is where I disagree with the textbook the second time. Happens periodically. Don't start with a procedural opening. To me, that's just beyond boring and does not engage your reader at all. It's a procedural opening is essentially saying, I am going to talk about this. This is what I find, blah. It's so boring. Sorry, that's my cat getting into trouble again. I don't know if you heard it, but cats are always getting into trouble. So again, don't do it. Very boring. I've done it in the past. There's an appropriate time to do it. For this class, it's just not appropriate. I'm asking you to be a little more creative and a little more engaging in how you do it. Okay, so I'm not saying that it's totally bad and horrible. There's a time to do it, and I've done it in my own writing in college. But for my class, please don't. Narratives are the same way. For English 101, you don't need to narrate because you don't have any authority. Narrate when you have authority and credibility in what you're writing about. So I hope you can understand the difference. It's not that I'm naysaying both of these. It's just for this level, for English 101, just not the best choice in my opinion. You can work a little harder and do a little more. And then when you get to a higher level of writing, then you can look at those options. So moving on to conclusions, just like your intro leads your reader into your subject, your conclusion leads it out. And if I had to pick one of the two that was more important, I mean, they're both absolutely essential to your writing, but the one that needs more work is probably your conclusion, because you've got to answer the so what. You have to lead your reader out. You have to leave them satisfied. You have to leave them agreeing with you, at least understanding your point. And I'll go more into this in Ending with Power. So it's very, very important that you do your work with your conclusion. Your introduction is essential, of course, but your conclusion, I think, is even more so. So make sure you properly lead your reader out. You can go step by step. You can be very methodical about that. You don't want to just dump your reader and say, okay, I'm done. And sometimes conclusions are written that way and they're very unsatisfying, and it totally negates everything that you did in your paper if you end that poorly. So be careful of that. The length is just what I said earlier with the introductions. If you have a longer paper, your conclusion is going to be longer because the thinking is going to be more complex, and you have to work harder to lead your reader out of what you were saying. The typical problems I see all the time, so just be aware of them. Your conclusion is not a time to restate everything that you've already said. It's not a time to raise a new point or to bring something new up. You don't want to make a bunch of generalizations and overstatements about what you've said, because that alienates your reader. So many times I get students who say, everybody does this, and I'm usually pretty honest about it, and I'll comment and say, I don't. Just to prove that I'm the only person reading this paper and I disagree. So if I disagree, a lot of people are going to disagree. So don't show ignorance by making a bunch of overstatements in your conclusion. It's going to kill all the work that you did previously. And then don't be anticlimactic. That means that you've built up and done all this work just to fizzle out at the end. You don't want to fizzle out. You want to end with power. Especially your last sentence. You just want to give a final punch. And this is why I said earlier in the quarter not to end with somebody else's words by using a quote from a source. You want to end with power from you. Ending with a quote, to me, is anticlimactic. It's not a good way to end. So you have to think about how you want to be remembered. And this is why the conclusion is so important, because it affects your credibility. It affects how well your paper is received by your reader. It affects everything about it. And even if you have a weak beginning, as in maybe you didn't engage your reader very well, or you didn't introduce enough, maybe you didn't provide enough background information, to me that stuff can be kind of forgiven and forgotten if you conclude really, really well. So just keep that in mind. You don't want a super weak, like as in an illogical introduction, because that'll just kill your argument too. But I mean weak here as in you didn't engage well enough, or you didn't spend enough time with it, or it's not as creative. So have a really powerful ending. It will pay off in the end. So the bottom line for introductions and conclusions, be creative in an academic way, be engaging. You want your reader to want to read your stuff, even if your only reader is me. And you want to be powerful, especially in the conclusion, but you want to be powerful everywhere in your paper. And then be logical, be intelligent, have that logos aspect of your writing, and it will all fit together. And again, I know that introductions and conclusions can be very difficult. You may want to leave your introduction and your conclusion to the very end, as in write all your body paragraphs and then go back and write your conclusion and your introduction based on what you stated in your body paragraphs. That's how I usually write. It's much easier that way. Also start fresh, write your whole paper, kind of get it out of your system, and then spend one day working on your introduction and one day working on your conclusion. They're so hard, and they could be, I think, the biggest source of writer's block. So if you find introductions and conclusions are very difficult for you, leave them till the end. And what I do personally is I do the body and then I do the conclusion, because usually it's your conclusion. I mean, obviously it makes sense that your body paragraphs lead into your conclusion. a little bit more than your introduction does, at least when I write. So I'll pretty quickly tack on the conclusion after that, and then I'll go back to the introduction. For me, introductions are a little harder because I have a harder time being creative and engaging. So do whatever works for you, and don't think that you have to start with your introduction. That's just asking for a lot of wasted time and a lot of frustration. So use the textbook, use the strategies that they list, and again, try to be really engaging. It's hard, but the more you work with it, the more you revise it, the better off it'll be, and it will totally be worth it in the end.